Welcome to our deep dive into trauma and healing.
Huh.
We're going to be pulling some really interesting insights from The Body Keeps the Score.
Hmm.
This book goes deep into how trauma affects us, like not just in our minds, but our bodies too.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
It is.
Trauma, it shows up in ways we don't always expect.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just the actual event that's traumatic. It's the
Mhm.
everything that comes after,
Oh,
how it
right.
lingers in our emotions, our relationships, even how we physically feel. It's wild.
Right off the bat, this book hit me with some stats that were pretty shocking, like 1 in 3 couples experiencing physical violence.
Wow.
I know, that's from the Centers for Disease Control, by the way.
Okay.
And then it says 1 in 5 Americans were sexually molested as children. Like, it really just makes you realize how widespread trauma is. It's not a niche thing.
It's more common than we think, that's for sure. But, what's important to remember is that these statistics, they don't define us, right?
No.
Humans are incredibly resilient. We have this amazing capacity to heal, to move forward, even after going through some really, really tough things. But we've got to acknowledge the impact of trauma, even when we think we're over it.
Yeah, you think you're good, and then bam, something happens.
Exactly.
The book talks about this Vietnam War vet, Tom.
Okay.
Outwardly, the guy had it all. A great career, loving family, but underneath, he felt emotionally numb, disconnected.
It's like a hidden wound, isn't it?
It is, and it makes you wonder, like, how many other people are going through something similar but don't even realize it? Maybe even ourselves.
Absolutely. Tom's story is a great example of how trauma can be buried,
Right.
but still have this powerful hold on us. He might have convinced himself he was fine,
Right.
but that emotional numbness, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, it's like the book's title says, The Body Keeps the Score. Right.
Exactly.
It's not just our minds holding on to the past, our bodies remember too.
Yeah.
Like, it's in our cells.
It really is. And that's why sometimes we react in ways that don't quite match the situation. We overreact or we shut down completely.
Yeah.
It's like the book talks about another veteran, Bill. He had a flashback triggered by an ink blot test.
An Inca blot.
I know, right? Years after the war, he still felt that same fear, that sensory overload, just from an ink blot.
That's crazy.
It shows you the power of these seemingly random triggers.
That makes me think, sometimes I have these really strong physical reactions to things that seem small to other people. Like my heart starts racing or my stomach clenches up. Could that be like echoes of past experiences I haven't fully dealt with? It's like fascinating, but also kind of scary.
It's definitely worth paying attention to those reactions. What's fascinating is that the book gets into how our brains respond to trauma.
Oh, yeah.
It explains that during a traumatic event, the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, basically goes into overdrive.
I've heard about the fight, flight, or freeze response. Is that what the amygdala controls?
Exactly. It floods your body with all these stress hormones to help you survive the threat.
Right.
But the problem is, sometimes the amygdala gets stuck in the on position because of past trauma.
Ah, I see.
And then it's hard to regulate your emotions and reactions in everyday life, even when there's no real danger.
So it's not just a feeling. Trauma changes how our brains actually work. That's wild.
It's powerful stuff. And get this. The book also talks about how Broca's area, the speech center of the brain, goes offline during flashbacks.
Wait, so you literally can't even talk about what you're feeling in those moments?
It's like your brain shuts down the ability to put those experiences into words.
Wow. That makes so much sense. I've heard people say it's hard to talk about their trauma, and I never really understood why.
It's not just about feeling uncomfortable or ashamed. It's like a physical inability to articulate it.
So we've got these physical responses, our brains going haywire.
Yeah.
And then the book throws in another layer. Early childhood experiences, attachment styles. It's like our childhoods have this huge impact on how we handle stress and relationships, even as adults.
It's all about how we learn to regulate our emotions and navigate the world. The book describes this mother playing with her baby. At one point, the baby accidentally hurts her, right? And there's this moment of tension. But the mother reassures the baby. They reconnect. It's this back and forth of attunement and repair, which is essential for developing secure attachment.
So it's like the baby learns that even when there are upsets, the relationship is still safe and secure.
Exactly. But when a child's needs aren't consistently met, or if they experience abuse or neglect, it can lead to insecure attachment styles.
Right.
And that can have a ripple effect throughout their lives, affecting their relationships, their ability to cope with stress, even their self-worth. It's pretty profound.
So basically, understanding our attachment style can give us some clues about why we react the way we do today, even as grown-ups.
It's like holding up a mirror to our past to see how it's shaping our present.
That's pretty powerful. But okay, the big question is, how do we actually deal with the effects of trauma and start to heal? The book points out that traditional talk therapy, it's got its limits,
Yeah, it's not a magic bullet, that's for sure.
especially when your body's still stuck in that state of overwhelm or freeze. Talking about the past might not be enough.
But you're hitting the nail on the head there. It's not just about processing thoughts and emotions. It's about addressing how trauma gets trapped in the body.
So what are some other approaches that could be helpful? The book mentions something called somatic experiencing.
Ah, yes. Somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine. It focuses on gently guiding people to notice and work with their body sensations. The goal is to help regulate the nervous system and release that trapped trauma energy.
Okay, so instead of trying to analyze the trauma intellectually, we're learning to listen to our bodies.
Exactly. It's about feeling safe and grounded in the present moment, which, let's be honest, can be super challenging for trauma survivors.
For sure. Another method the book explores is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
EMDR, yep.
How does that even work?
So EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, like eye movements or tapping. It's based on the idea that when trauma happens, those memories can get stuck in the brain. Yeah, like they're frozen in time, causing all this ongoing distress. And the bilateral stimulation helps to unlock those memories and allows them to be processed in a healthier way.
The book tells this story about Maggie, who was able to vividly remember her childhood trauma during an EMDR session. Sounds intense.
It can be, but she felt empowered by the experience, not overwhelmed.
That's amazing.
Yeah, EMDR can be really effective in reducing the emotional charge of those traumatic memories, so people can access them without feeling re-traumatized.
Okay, so we've got therapies that focus on the body and the brain, and then the book throws in neurofeedback as another potential tool. What's that all about?
Neurofeedback, it's a way of training the brain to regulate its electrical activity. It involves these sensors on your scalp that monitor your brainwave patterns.
Interesting.
By seeing how your brain is responding in real time, you can actually learn to shift those patterns towards a more balanced state.
So it's like we can retrain our brains to function differently.
That's exactly it. We're tapping into the brain's amazing plasticity, its ability to change and adapt, even after trauma. It's really pretty remarkable.
Wow. It sounds like there are a lot of different ways to approach healing trauma, which is really encouraging.
There's not just one right way. It's about finding what works best for each individual. We'll actually dive into more specific modalities and techniques in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, I can't wait. This is definitely giving me a lot to think about. Join us for part 2, where we'll continue uncovering the science of trauma and explore even more pathways to healing. See you there.
Welcome back. As we keep going through The Body Keeps the Score, one of the things that really jumps out is how important human connection is for healing.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We've been talking so much about the body and the brain, but now it feels like we're zooming out a little, looking at how healing happens in a social context.
Exactly. Trauma tends to isolate people, but healing actually needs connection to thrive.
It's like the opposite of how trauma works.
Right.
The book brings up a really powerful example, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Oh, yeah. A fascinating case study.
They were dealing with the collective trauma of apartheid, right?
Exactly. And their whole approach was rooted in this concept called Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
It's a beautiful idea that emphasizes our shared humanity.
Like we're all connected.
Yeah.
My humanity is inextricably bound up in yours.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't truly heal alone. We need to feel seen, heard, understood by others.
That sense of connection is crucial. And the book really challenges us to think beyond just focusing on individual problems.
Okay.
Instead, we should be creating environments that are supportive and understanding.
I see what you mean. It's like instead of blaming individuals, we create a space where they can actually heal.
That's the idea. I'm thinking about how this could apply to schools, for example.
Schools, yeah, that's a great example. So much happens there.
Imagine if schools were more trauma sensitive, if they recognized how trauma impacts kids' behavior and responded with compassion instead of punishment.
It's a huge shift.
It is. Instead of just punishing a kid for acting out, what if we try to understand what's going on beneath the surface?
Yeah, like what happened to this kid that's making them act this way?
Exactly. And then instead of punishment, we offer support. It's a totally different approach.
It is. It's like we're meeting their needs instead of just reacting to their behavior.
Right. Think about it. calming spaces within schools, teaching kids self-regulation techniques, fostering a sense of belonging. These things can make a world of difference.
It's such a contrast to traditional discipline, which the book actually suggests can sometimes make the effects of trauma even worse.
It's true.
Like adding more trauma on top of existing trauma.
Exactly. But if we can start to see those challenging behaviors as a sign that something deeper is going on.
As a cry for help.
Yes. Then we can shift from just reacting to actually being proactive.
We're not just trying to control kids, we're trying to help them heal.
And create an environment where they feel safe enough to learn and grow, where they know their needs will be met with understanding.
I love that. Okay, so we're thinking about trauma-informed schools. What about the way we diagnose mental health conditions?
That's another important piece. The book argues that the way we diagnose mental health issues often misses the underlying role of trauma.
Like we're slapping labels on people without really understanding the root cause of their struggles.
It happens all the time. People get this long list of diagnoses, but no one stops to ask, hey, what happened to you?
What's the story behind these symptoms?
Right. The author suggests a more holistic approach, one that takes into account a person's entire life history to really understand how trauma has shaped them.
And this brings us back to the idea that the body keeps the score, right?
It all connects.
We need to look deeper beyond just the symptoms to address the root cause, the trauma that's driving those symptoms in the first place.
Absolutely. And the good news is the book actually gives us a ton of information about how to do just that.
That's hopeful.
It is. It talks about a bunch of different therapeutic approaches, like the ones we discussed earlier, somatic experiencing, EMDR, neurofeedback. It's a toolbox full of possibilities.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach, right? It's about finding what works for each individual person.
Exactly. And that might involve working with your body's sensations, reprocessing traumatic memories, or even training your brain to regulate its activity. There are so many options.
It's like we're expanding our understanding of what healing can look like.
And remembering that healing is a process, a journey. It's not a destination you arrive at overnight. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns.
Like it's not always a straight line forward.
But with the right support and a commitment to being kind to ourselves, it's possible to move toward a more fulfilling life. A life where trauma doesn't have to hold us back.
I love that. This whole deep dive is really highlighting how incredibly resilient we humans are. It's amazing to see how much research and knowledge exists around this topic.
It is pretty remarkable. It speaks to our capacity for healing and transformation.
Okay, before we wrap up this part, there's one more thing from the book I wanted to touch on. It introduces this concept called developmental trauma disorder.
Yes, developmental trauma disorder.
It's a proposed diagnosis that sheds light on the impact of early childhood trauma on a child's development. And it's often overlooked.
Absolutely. It goes beyond the traditional definition of PTSD.
It does, right.
It recognizes the widespread effects of things like chronic abuse and neglect, which, unfortunately, can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Like struggling to focus, having trouble controlling impulses, or even forming secure attachments.
Exactly. These kids often have difficulty regulating their emotions, forming healthy relationships, even with basic physical functions. It can affect their whole lives.
That's so sad.
It is. And the book argues that recognizing developmental trauma disorder is crucial for getting kids the right kind of support and intervention.
So it's not just about labeling them. It's about understanding the unique challenges they face and creating a system of care that actually meets their needs.
It's about breaking that cycle of trauma,
Giving them a chance to heal and thrive.
Exactly.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into The Body Keeps the Score. We've covered so much ground already, like how trauma affects the brain, the body, our relationships. But now, let's get practical. What are some actual healing techniques that can help?
One of the things the book really emphasizes is this concept of bottom-up processing.
Bottom up.
It's basically working directly with the body's sensations and the nervous system, rather than just focusing on thoughts and emotions.
Okay, that makes sense, given how much we've talked about the body keeping score. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think about therapies like somatic experiencing or sensoromotor psychotherapy. These methods recognize that a lot of trauma is stored in the body as these things called implicit memories.
Implicit memories. Those are different from regular memories.
Kind of. They're more like the feeling of a memory rather than the actual event itself. Sensations, emotions, physical impulses that we might not even be consciously aware of. And these therapies help people to gently access and release those trapped experiences.
Interesting. So how do they do that? What happens in a session?
It can vary, of course, but it often involves things like movement, touch, breath work. It's about helping people reconnect with their bodies in a safe way
Okay.
and learn to regulate those nervous system responses that get triggered by trauma.
I can see how that could be really helpful, especially for people who like feel disconnected from their bodies or who find it hard to even talk about their trauma.
Yeah. Absolutely. It can be transformative. The book also talks a lot about mindfulness and meditation for healing trauma.
Oh yeah, mindfulness. I've heard about that.
Trauma can keep us trapped in the past, right?
Yeah.
Constantly reliving those painful experiences. But mindfulness helps us cultivate this non-judgmental awareness of the present moment.
The here and now.
Exactly. Including our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations. It's about observing those experiences with curiosity rather than getting swept away by them.
So we're not trying to suppress those difficult emotions or thoughts. We're just learning to notice them without judgment.
Exactly. And that can be so freeing. It creates space for healing and allows us to respond to those experiences in a healthier way.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what about this idea of pendulation that the book mentions? What's that all about?
Oh, pendulation. That's a great one. It refers to this natural back and forth that happens in our nervous system between activation and regulation.
Activation and
To
regulation.
give it like a pendulum swinging. Sometimes we're activated, feeling alert and energized, and sometimes we're more regulated, feeling calm and relaxed.
Makes sense.
But trauma can mess with that natural rhythm. It can leave people stuck in a state of hyperarousal where they're constantly on edge. Or the opposite, in a state of shutdown, feeling numb and withdrawn.
Oh, wow. So how do we get back to that natural balance?
Well, there are therapeutic approaches that actually use pendulation to help guide people to move safely between those extremes.
Oh, interesting.
So they gradually expand their window of tolerance, allowing them to experience a wider range of emotions without feeling overwhelmed.
This is like we're building up our capacity to handle the ups and downs of life without getting stuck in those extreme states.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really crucial aspect of healing, working with the social engagement system.
The social engagement system, what's that?
It's the part of our nervous system that lets us connect with others, feel safe and loved, and regulate our emotions together. It's what gives us that feeling of belonging, of not being alone.
So when trauma happens, it messes with that system, makes it harder to connect.
Exactly. People can feel isolated, disconnected, unable to trust. Healing often involves rebuilding that capacity for connection through safe and supportive relationships.
So therapy can play a role, but it also sounds like it's about building those connections in our everyday lives.
For sure. That might mean group therapy, community involvement, or even just spending time with loved ones who make us feel safe and supported. It's about relearning that we can rely on others and that we are worthy of love and connection.
It's amazing to see how many different pathways there are to healing trauma. It's not just about talking, but about engaging with our bodies, our minds, and our social connections. It's really holistic.
It is. And the book reminds us that the journey isn't always linear. There will be ups and downs, moments of progress, moments of setbacks.
Like anything worthwhile.
Exactly. It's about learning a new way of being in the world, one that honors our experiences and lets us move forward with strength and resilience.
And hopefully even find some joy along the way.
Absolutely. It's about reclaiming our lives, finding meaning and purpose, even in the aftermath of trauma. So after this deep dive into The Body Keeps the Score, what's your biggest takeaway?
For me, it's a realization that healing is possible, even from the most painful experiences. And there are so many different ways to get there, each unique to the individual. What about you? What resonates most with you?
I think the most powerful message is that trauma doesn't have to define us. It's a part of our story, but it doesn't have to be the whole story. And by understanding the science of trauma and exploring these different healing approaches, we can really reclaim our lives and step into a future that's full of possibilities. So what step can you take today, right now, to nurture your own well-being and tap into that amazing resilience we all have inside us?
That's a great question for everyone to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into trauma and healing. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and maybe even a renewed sense of hope. Take care. We'll see you next time.